Let me get my timer going. Alright, maybe.
Okay. Our disease is on amyotrophic sclerosis, which most of you know as ALS, and the introduction to it is the cell-to-cell communication, and the first thing is a reception to it.
Interception, the ligand binds to the signaling molecule.
The second thing is transduction,
That's whenever the signal is changed so that it can bring about a specific response.
and the final step to the pathways is your response.
And that's just whenever the cell response occurs.
The response to it would be the genetic idea between the motor neurons and the astrocytes. And the motor neurons is what's affected through ALS. So when like the motor neurons like aren't developed or like go away, like you lose them, you're not able to move, but it doesn't affect your voluntary which is like your sight and your smell and your sense.
It only affects your voluntary muscles, and it doesn't affect your senses, like she said. But some people have trouble whenever their breathing muscles atrophy and weaken. They have to have ventilation and breathing treatment.
The causes to ALS, it's more of inherent through your family members, and it's more like 5 to 10%, so it's not fully. The chromosome that's most affected is chromosome 21, and that's like the chromosome that's just not developed fully, so that's what affects that. And through your motor neurons, when they aren't developed, that's what causes the death through an ALS patient.
Only 5 to 10% is inherited, and that's called familial ALS whenever you have a family history of it. But the most common percent, about 90%, is just sporadic ALS. It has nothing to do with your family history or genetics.
And the mutations of it is like through your several genes. Even though only chromosome 21 is affected, your genes throughout your body, like your DNA sequence, the genes and all aren't, they're just the mutations, and there are several of them that can be affected.
Animal cells have cell junctions that connect the cytoplasms of adjacent cells. And in paracrine signaling, that's where it is a type of local signaling, and it sends the signal to a cell that is nearby. And then in the synaptic signaling, it sends the neurotransmitters across the synapse to it could be to the other cell, which could be a nerve cell or a muscle cell. And then in endocrine signaling, it just sends hormones, and they go across in the circulatory system in the blood to other parts of the body where it reaches target cells that recognize the hormones.
Okay, your neighboring cells are like directly through the communication, and that's what allows the communication. And your target cell is what detects your signaling molecule and from outside the cell, and that's when it'll go inside. And your gap junctions is what connects all the animal cells types or like the human cells through ALS. And it passes your ions through your signaling molecules. So when it passes, it'll like that's what like affects the chromosome when it passes through the pathways.
And the protein kinase cascade is just where the proteins phosphorylate the one beside it. And phosphorylation activates the protein, and dephosphorylation returns it back to its inactive state.
A ligand is when the hormones go inside the cell and it connects all the receptors together, and that's when your DNA sequence comes up. And when the DNA sequence is goes through, that's like your ALS isn't affected by that, and the ALS doesn't affect the genes. So the ligand like connects the receptor to what makes your ALS affected to a patient.
In ligand-gated ion channels, it acts like a gate, so whenever the ligand binds to the receptor, it opens up, allowing the ions to come in, and then the ion concentration of that specific ion increases within the cell. When then the ligand leaves the receptor, it closes up so no more ions can come in. And in ALS, there's a channel called NMDA, and it binds to glutamate, and the channel passes calcium and sodium ions to potassium. And if your glutamate levels are too high, it can cause the motor neurons to die. This is what happens.
Okay. Your protein kinase is just like your enzyme that takes place, and that's when your phosphate groups connect and go through phosphorylation. That's what like causes the phosphorylation. And about 500 genes through phosphorylation is connected, and that's what makes ALS. And your chromosomes, like it goes through the human chromosomes, and when it goes through the human chromosomes, that's when it affects through the protein kinase.
This is our figure B, which is just he's a famous actor who has ALS.
His name is Stephen Hopkins, and Stephen was diagnosed at the age of 21, and they told him that he wouldn't live until he would die on his 25th birthday, and he died when he was 72. So his lifespan ended up longer than they said, even though he was diagnosed at a young age. So he pretty much lived through ALS when he was one of the very many that they didn't expect to live, but he did.
This is just a picture of the chromosome 21 that is affected in most patients.
Okay, and the cyclic AMP signal is the signal that goes to your cytoplasm, and the second messenger to your G protein pathways. And when it goes through your G protein pathways, that's what like sets off the messenger, and it all activates another protein. And the calcium is also your calcium ions are also your first messenger, and your phospholipids are your PIP2, your DAC, and your IP3, and your DAG is like your second messenger pathways through it, and your IP3 is just it binds to your other gated ion channel protein. So right here in figure C, it's the signal and pathways through the ALS, and so your motor neuron is gonna like reduce and release your lactate right here, and then when it goes out, it's gonna be a transporter, and your transporter is makes your PG3-2, and that's what makes a P75 receptor. And your receptor goes through your activation, what activates it, and when it activates, that's what makes like your neurons like inflamed and all, and that's when it will take place in ALS, and it'll be transported, and when it transports through your neurons to make your inflammation, that's when your transporters come through, and it allows the stress and all. So when the stress takes place, it like hits the motor neurons, and that's when it affects it really bad. So then, that's like what the ALS disease is mainly about. So it affects your motor neurons, but it doesn't like it affects it, but then your genes aren't affected also. And it's more commonly you get diagnosed when you're at a young age, and they expect you to die at a young age, but just like Stephen Hopkins, he ended up living.
Right. Okay. One of the other names for ALS, they have other names. Did you see in your research anything about Lou Gehrig's disease?
That's the amyotrophic scoliosis.
Sclerosis.
Sclerosis. So that's like they have different forms of ALS, and that Lou Gehrig's disease is more of the trophic. So there's like it's pretty much the same thing, and it's pretty much like it still affects your motor neurons, but he's not like badly affected as Stephen Hopkins is. So it's like not all the way.
Yeah,
like
his muscles and his muscles shut down. He didn't have the deformities like Stephen Hawkins. All right, so one of the things that I was reading is it said, it talked about calcium, and I know that you mentioned the glutamate and calcium. Could you just take a second, just in your own words, just explain to us how glutamate and calcium lead to the problems that we see with someone with ALS?
Glutamate has to be cleared out, and there's a protein called EAAT2, and whenever it doesn't clear out all the glutamate, then it can cause the motor neurons to die.
Like calcium shows up as your first messenger also, and that messenger shows through.
So Rett disease, your neurons are there, they're just not able to make the connections. This is what we call a neurodegenerative disease because it's actually killing the neurons, so therefore they can't work like they're supposed to. Okay, and then one more question. You said that it is very rarely genetic, correct?
It's 5%.
5 to
10%
10%,
genetic.
and the
and
rest
then
of
it's
it's
like-
just
Inherited, it'll go through family
Just-
members, and the rest just,
bad luck. Bad luck.
The genetic is called familial ALS, and the other one is called sporadic ALS, and that's like 90% of the cases are sporadic.
Very good. I want to say one thing, just because I'm a nerd and y'all are not. Stephen Hawkins is a physicist. He is amazing. Well, he was amazing. Okay.
He's not dead.
And he is, there is a